Ladies and gentlemen, the star and producer of the great film you've just seen, the legendary Harry Belafonte. Mr. Belafonte produced the film. There wouldn't have been a film without him. He was the source, the inspiration, the fount. It's your film, it's your triumph. Now tell us, you read the novel, right? Somebody gave you the novel, or you just happened upon it? A novel by an Illinois native, a very good writer named William McGivern. How did that come across your desk?
One of the young people on my staff had been looking through material. I'd had a group of young apprentices who I charged with the responsibility of finding material that was offbeat, that was unusual, that would be in the making of it, would be economically feasible. And one of the young men came with this book. And I read it, and it embodied all the things that I thought were not only appropriate for a good piece of cinema, but in it I found a lot of opportunity for metaphor, to make parallels to the time in which we were living, the mood of the world, especially the mood of race and people here in the United States. And I thought that this would be a wonderful opportunity to use cinema to make a fairly contemporary statement. Not too many films in that period were being made, except for one other colleague of mine by the name of Sidney Poitier. And Sidney and I grew up together. We met when we were quite young, and our friendship hooked, and it lasted for all these years. And we had often conferred with one another about, if the opportunity presented itself, what kinds of film would we want to make, or what kinds of plays would we do. And this was my first offering. I'd done some films before this, but it wasn't in my charge.
This was in your charge, and it's very hard-hitting, and it treats racial relations in America in a much stronger, less sentimental way than any film before this, I think. It's really hard on that subject. And what's interesting is, and the audience may not know this, the novel is very different. Believe it or not, Slater and Johnny become friends. Much of the story is after the botched heist, and they sacrifice themselves for each other, and Earl actually gets killed in order to go back and rescue Johnny. So from this great hatred and animosity blossoms a kind of love and mutual respect. Now, that's not the story you chose to tell.
We didn't think that story was workable. As desired as it would be and was, and that has always been my own course in life, looking for a common humanity and looking for a friendly world. And my commitment as an activist has always been to causes that reflect that thought and those feelings. But we needed to talk about America as it was being revealed. And when we read the book, we found the book interesting, found it highly romantic. But
inspirational?
Well, very inspirational, because I knew that this material would have to be in the hands of a remarkable craftsman. And one of the film writers that I most admired, because of the previous work that he had done, and I'd heard him speak in a number of forums, I decided that if and ever I had an opportunity to work with him, I would pursue that opportunity. And his name was Abe Polonsky. And Abe Polonsky, I presented him with the work. He read it. We talked back and forth, and he said, let me think on it. let's try to find a hook, and let's see if we can make this thing come alive. We worked for a few weeks, and we came up with the version that you now see.
With the apocalyptic ending.
With the apocalyptic ending. The apocalyptic ending became more clear to us when we got the director that we were fortunate enough to get, Bobby Wise. Robert Wise, for me, was a man that had most fascinated me and attracted me as a director. First of all, I liked the work that he had done, first of all, as an editor.
Citizen Kane. He
Yeah.
started at the top.
Citizen Kane was what he came to. Before that, he did the original version of Hunchback of Notre Dame, a very early film and one of the most revered with Charles Lawton and this classic piece. And as I watched Bob as an editor, I then watched him as he moved into directing. And the film that I saw that I liked very much was called I Want to Live. And in that film, it was a film that was speaking out against capital punishment. And I saw it a few times, liked it very much, talked with Abe about it, and said, let's see if we can get it. So I sent him an outline that Abe had sketched, and Bob read it and said, I'm coming to New York. While there, I'd like to sit and meet with you. I must tell you that when I sent him the outline, there was no name on the script. Just sent it to him, and he came to New York, and he then said, who was the writer? And I said to him, the name of the writer I am sworn to hold sacred. I've been given permission by him to reveal who he is, if in fact it has any bearing on whether or not you will make the film. And he said, who is it? And I said, it was Abe Polonsky. And he knew instantly who it was and the kind of difficulty that we carved out for ourselves by hiring Abe.
A blacklisted writer.
He was, but that was the point.
Yeah.
He was blacklisted. He was one of the Hollywood 10, and for a long time suffered the indignities of the blacklist. He and Dalton Trumbo and a number of other men who were caught in that vicious cycle of government oppression had taken a strong and a moral position on their rights as citizens, their right to political choice, their right to join and to speak out in First Amendment and all the above. And he had never done a film before that his name was not on. But he weighed this film in relationship to the time in which it was to take place. He saw that I was a first-time black film producer. He had known of some of the things that I had done before and my relationship to certain social causes. And he said that in this instance I would keep my name off the work. And I felt that I had to find someone who would take credit, understand the political consequence, as well as the political environment. And I went to a very, very close friend of mine and spoke to him. And he said he'd think about it. And after giving it some thought, he agreed that he would accept the title. His name was John Oliver Killens, and he was one of the most promising young black writers of the day, novelist. He'd written a couple of books that had captured the imagination of the American literary world, gotten great reviews in the New York Times, was highly praised. He and I were very close. And as a matter of fact, coming on in what was to have been just a title, he sat with Abe and myself on many a night, carving out some of the more interesting moments in the film. The next task was to speak to the cast.
There's another writer on the film, though, Nelson Gidding.
Nelson
He's giving
Gidding
him credit.
became the official screenwriter, adopted from a story by John Killings. And Nelson Giddings was a writer that had worked with Bobby Wise through many of his scripts.
Including I Want to Live, I believe.
Including I Want to Live. And I thought the combination was splendid. And if anybody tried to work their way through the labyrinth of names that were attached to this film, they'd have a hard time blacklisting all of us and even finding out there was a blacklisted person in our midst.
May I ask, speaking of names omitted, you are the producer of the film, really,
Yes.
but it says produced and directed by Robert Wise.
I was what we now call executive producer. Bobby Wise was the producer director because he handled all the production choices on the film. But I was the executive producer. It came through my company. I got the film financed. And I was very fortunate that United Artists, the film company, had just emerged again after many, many years buried away. A company that had been found in the early days, back in the 1920s and 30s by Charlie Chaplin. And its purpose back in those days was to do films that were more deeply rooted in social consciousness. The company never saw the light of day, at least not fully. And when it emerged again, a group of young lawyers in New York City who were adamant on the issue of the Blacklist decided to rebel against the system, rebel against the studios, raised a lot of independent money to become independent filmmakers. The first film they did was a release of for exhibition, a film called Red Shoes. It was on a ballet, and it did very well economically. The next film they did was the film that they started from the ground up, which was High Noon with Gary Cooper. And then along came Kirk Douglas and a number of others, Burt Lancaster, who made up this cadre of rebels against the Blacklist, and who would make films written by anyone who was worthy. And when I petitioned to become part of that circle, I was warmly welcomed by them to kind of round out the picture.